Brother Wayne Blake is going to be speaking this hour on Back to Biblical Speaking. He and his wife Laura have a daughter, Jenna, and they are with us as well, and we appreciate them coming. He is a member at the Fish Hatchery Road congregation in Huntsville, Texas. Works there with Brother Bruce Stolting. He is a 1998 graduate from the Spring Bible Institute and has worked with congregations both in Texas, Tennessee, and Louisiana. He speaks on various lectureships. He also holds gospel meetings. He does a lot of youth work as well, and directing Bible camps and such. So we have always appreciated Brother Wayne for his stand for the truth. Know that he's going to do an excellent job in dealing with Back to Biblical Speaking.
Not to sound redundant, but I also want to say I am deeply honored to be able to speak to you today. To be invited to come again to Pensacola, to almost said Texas, because it feels about the same. I always thought when you went north and east, it got cooler, and it doesn't. At least not down here. This morning we want to talk about the idea of back to biblical speaking. When I first thought about that topic, I thought about, well, does that mean I need to talk about the idea we need to go back to speaking these and thous and things like that, like many people did not long in our future. But that's not what we're getting at here. Jeremiah, one of the great prophets, dealt with a very poor attitude of people, sadly, within his time. And in Jeremiah chapter 6, oh man, I forgot my reading glasses. We're not going any further until I get these on. That thing could be 35 print. I'm not going to read it. Jeremiah chapter 6. Again, verse 14, it says, "They have healed also the hurt of thy daughter, of my people slightly saying, Peace, peace, when there is no peace." And we want to point out verse 15 in particular. It says, "Were they ashamed when they had committed abomination? Nay, they were not at all ashamed, neither could they blush." And we want to focus upon the idea, when we think about speech, we have, as the commercial says, we've come a long way, baby, in the types of words and communication that we have today. We have every type of computer and thing that you can hold in your hand. I don't have one. I have a computer, and that's about as far as I've gone. But I know that we have all manner of communication, and we have texting and sexting and any other kinds of things that the world has to offer to try to put forth communications between one point to another. And within that idea, a lot of language has begun to be used, and from the very inception of it, that was vulgar, it was shameless. And what has happened is we have grown a generation of young people who have been brought up on this type of communication. Now, I don't want to fault just our young people because, they have parents. And we're going to talk about that a little bit this morning too. But when we talk about this subject, I don't want anybody leaving here thinking about this is a sermon designed to talk to young people, because it is, but then it isn't. Because I'm also talking to we who are older people. Brethren, we need to stand up and go back to biblical speaking and get away from the internet attitude of how that we speak to one another. I have often used my daughter as an example, and she hears her name and she perks up, and then, sometimes she gets embarrassed. She's at that age, 6 years old, you can embarrass her now. And whereas before she embarrassed you. No, I'm just kidding. But I want you to think about something, people. My mother had to have a conversation with her other grandkids because my daughter one day up and began speaking some things that she had not heard at our house, as well as around other people that she associated with. Our young children, and this, to me, it really hits me because I do have a 6-year-old. My 6-year-old is listening to what you're saying. And when you use the Lord's name in vain, when you say, "Oh my God," or "Lord, have mercy," or "Goodness gracious," my daughter will call your attention to it. And you might not like that, but she's reminding you of your responsibility as a Christian. In our home, my daughter has corrected me. There are times when I have said something like, "Oh, goodness," and she's reminded me, "Dad, that's not a word we're supposed to say around here." Okay, I agree. There are other words that we use that we don't think about the idea that are vulgar in and of themselves, but they're words that, they tend to get toward that. The word B-U-T-T. I've heard a lot of people say, that word. My daughter has learned that the proper term is buttocks, and she will use that word. She thinks it's funny. I can't correct her as much, but I do try to steer her away from using some words as often as others. Right, there was a time when there's certain things people say today we just never would have said. In fact, I would have had and I did, would have had my mouth washed out with soap often. And I did. I chewed a lot of bars of soap. I tasted soap to the point now that if it's soft water, I can't hardly stay and drink it. Soft water. Because, it kind of has a little head on it. Just the thought of it. But this morning we want to talk about that a little bit. Recent articles in national publications have revealed that a very veneered Christianity, and it puts it in quotation, is a widespread problem in Christendom. And we use that word, we're just talking about among all who profess to be Christians. We're talking about in the church, out of the church. A recent article told of a growing scandal within American Christianity. It said many of our church-growing teens are not Christians, or perhaps are marginal believers who profess religious ideas and represent an astonishing departure from historic Christianity. He goes on to say, he says, there's another book, the volume points out that among Roman Catholics, many of the teens, for example, revealed that 57% believe in reincarnation. Think about what that influence, where that came from. And all y'all know of someone down in Austin who had great influence in that. 46% believe in astrology. 48% believe in communicating with the dead. Now that goes right in line with Roman Catholicism, but the point is, what if we were to take a poll among young people who were not Catholics? I guarantee you, there's a lot of shows on now that talk about talking to the dead, and they have angels and all these other kind of things. Our world is just eat up with that kind of stuff. 21% believe in physics and fortune tellers. I said physics, didn't it? I maybe need some better glasses. Psychics and fortune tellers. Yeah, that does make more sense. I'm still a little nervous. I'll get past that here in a minute. Another group suggested, another study was given that recently suggested that 63% of American teens profess Christianity, but they said, do not believe that Jesus is the Son of God, nor is there a true one God. Think about that. 58% believe all faiths teach equally valid truths. That's over half, folks. That's over half. One of the troubling conclusions to clearly result from these studies is the fact that just going to church was not enough to prevent the drift into a doctrinal error and wanton lifestyles characteristics of thousands of, quote, Christian teens. It also adds this, and this is where I'm talking about, we're going to get into talking about parents, and we're going to get into it a little bit more. It says many parents believe that peer pressure is the greatest influence upon their youngsters. But studies dispute this. Now, he's going to say this, but understand, he's not saying that peer pressure isn't a problem. But he's saying we place far more emphasis upon peer pressure. And listen to what he says. Though peer pressure is doubtless significant to a degree, listen here, actually, it is the parent's influence that is most significant. The parents. We've been sold a bill of goods that, kids, they can't help it because of who they hang out with. It's just the way they are. Parents can. We can make an impact upon our children. But the truth is, many parents have surrendered the nurturing of their children to the public school and to church, with the complaint regarding later, why isn't the church doing more for our youth? You ever heard that? I've had people come right there at Fish Hatchery. We're a small group, like most of us. They'll look around, they'll say maybe 5, 10 young people, and they'll say, well, what do y'all have here for the youth? And my first response is, we're going to teach from the Word of God. That's what we have here for them. If you want a youth minister, there's a big church on the other side of town. Now, I'm not putting down all youth ministers, but I will put down most of them, because most of them I've met are not worth anything. They're not worth the money that was invested in them. Why isn't the church doing more for our youth? In other words, what they're saying is, why aren't we having more camping trips and sports activities and those types of things? And at the same time, they're ignoring or rationalizing the reasons for their children's neglect of their Bible lessons, their failure to attend worship services faithfully, and their worldly socialization with worldly, ungodly friends. While many of our Christian youth might find the sentiments expressed here, the idea given here is that one might be surprised at just how willing some are to apply the ideology of postmodernism to moral issues. It's a sad situation when our young people will argue for immersion and every Sunday communion, but then they turn right around and they will booze it up on the weekends. They will smoke pot, and they will boast of their sexual exploits on MySpace and other things like this, while accusing their parents of being too narrow-minded. It's becoming increasingly clear that a good number of Christian young people have a serious disconnect with the teachings of the New Testament on moral issues and their beliefs and conduct. Think about the movies and books. Now, I know my generation, my parents didn't like our music either. I understand that idea. But you know, the stuff that's coming out now debases women in such a way that I mean, even in my worst hatred of something, would never inflict that type of thing upon another person. And yet we have songs that are putting forth the idea to go out here and rape and pillage the village. And it's a good thing. Rap and hip-hop are cluttered with all types of coarseness that not only blast your ears while you're waiting at the traffic light, but also dirties your mind. There are things that are said in lyrics nowadays I'm telling you, even in my worst days, I never said some of those things. Christians now speak the new code language that's difficult and sometimes even to the point of impossible to decipher. Hey there, little bro, what's up? What you doing? You know, and then OMG. You know, if you lived under a rock and you came out here and hung out at a mall, you would think aliens had invaded. With the way people talk today. And I'm not talking, now understand something. I ain't an English major. I think y'all can pretty well figure that out by the way I'm speaking to you. But folks, we got to clean this up. I could not, I await the day when someone stands up to say a prayer and speaks in this unknown language. I've heard people stand up and refer to God as Daddy. I've heard that in the assembly. But the things some people say nowadays, I'd be scared about what they would say. When our youth want to look and talk like Snoop Dogg or Bob Marley or any other litany of many, you know, it's worse than maybe sometimes we think. Now, let's look at primarily this morning profanity. If you would, turn to James chapter 3. Oh, we got to get going. We got to get going. I always have that problem. I get up here and I start talking and I can't quit. And then before I know it, time's gone. James chapter 3, I'm sorry. Beginning at verse 1 and down through verse 12. It says, My brethren, be not many masters or teachers, knowing that we shall receive the greater condemnation. For in many things we offend all, and if any man offend, not in word, the same as a perfect man, and able to bridle the whole body. Beloved, we have put bits in the horses' mouths, that they may obey us, and we turn about their whole body. Behold also the ships, which, though they be so great and are driven by fierce winds, yet they are turned about by a very small helm, whithersoever the governor listeth. Even so the tongue is a little member, and boasteth great things. Behold how great a matter a little fire kindleth. And the tongue is a fire, a world of iniquity. So is the tongue among our members, that it defileth the whole body, and setteth on fire the course of nature, and it is set on fire of hell. For every kind of beast, and of birds, and of serpents, and of things in the sea is tamed, and have been tamed of mankind. But the tongue can no man tame. It is an unruly evil, full of deadly poison. Therewith bless we God, even the Father, and wherewith we curse man, which are made after the similitude of God. Out of the same mouth proceedeth evils, blessings, and cursings. My brethren, these things ought not to be so. Doth a fountain send forth at the same time sweet water and bitter? Can a fig tree, my brethren, bear olive berries, either a vine figs? So can no fountain both yield salt water and fresh. I don't know about you, but I'm sick of hearing profanity. I'm sick of it. You're exposed to it in the supermarket. Just last night, we went to a restaurant over here, go in and get some pizza. And we were just sitting in there waiting, and a man came in, and there was a ball game on the thing, and somebody blew a shot or something, and he just ripped one on out there. And he all of a sudden remembered that there were other people here. And he looks over, oh, I'm so sorry. Not knowing the area and all, and not having my pistol with me, I wasn't going to bother him. But I will say this, brother, we need to speak up to people when they do this kind of thing. We need to say something. We don't have to, denigrate them. We don't have to beat them down. We don't have to shoot them. Just talk to them. Just say, hey, I'd appreciate it if you think about what you're saying before you say it. Now, you'll get some weird looks. Some people get mad in a huff, and some people will cuss you. I've had that happen. And I've even had some of my brethren cuss me when I've told them to quit saying things. So, I've been cussed by the best. I can live with that. But, brother, we need to say something. We need to say something to our young people in our congregations. We need to say something to our older people in the congregations. Because those younger people are listening to what you're saying. And they hear you. And when you sit there and say, geez, and oh my God, and all litany of things that people use, those kids hear you. And as James has just pointed out, how can you bless and say all great things about God, and yet you curse your fellow man? The very people that God created. How can you do that? Brethren, these things ought not to be so. We hear it, not just from sailors, the old saying, cuss like a sailor. Or from the French, where some would say, oh, pardon my French. But we also hear it from every strata of society. Our president, just within the last week, speaking about BP, y'all heard it. If you listen to talk radio, you definitely heard it. And most of us probably in here do. Using curse words. People look at the derriere. It's just nothing, no big deal. It's just a little weird, no thing. But it's still a curse word. Still a curse word. Used to be the case of gentlemen. And I use that term loosely because we don't have a lot of gentlemen anymore. Used to be a time when our gentlemen would never use profanity in the presence of a woman. And I always thought that's interesting because just because you don't say it from a woman doesn't mean God doesn't know about it. And he's the one you're accountable to. But he's talking here about the idea of a show of respect. There are some things men just would not say in front of a woman. Well, women nowadays can swear with the best of them. There's things women will say nowadays that just frighten me. I work in a prison setting type thing with people that I'm going to tell you, I've heard women say some things that I never would have. I feel bad that a man would say them. Things they'll talk about, things they'll say about themselves, personal things that I don't understand. It's like being in a men's locker room. It almost seems as if some of their first words were of the four-letter variety. I got a boss that I talked to him about this, and he started understanding me. He's got a 4-year-old and a 7-year-old. And this guy cusses like a sailor up there at work. Say all manner of things. He went home one day and one of his kids said something, a curse word back to him, and he spanked him. In fact, he beat him. Told that kid, you're not going to say that to me. And he came to work the next day and said, I don't know where he heard that. I just don't understand that. If you speak that way around everybody, your kids they're like you. They're little mini yous. Little mini yous. A recent study of the Parents Television Council found that the use of profanity during the so-called family hour, which is basically 7 to 8 in the Central Time Zone, 8 to 9 Eastern, is up 58% from 2 years ago. The use of profanity. And the nature of the language many times is very sexually explicit. We can thank Bill Clinton for a lot of some of that. He's changed the mindset of a lot of people. What the definition is. The nature of language. The Bible is not silent in how we are to use properly the tongue. Paul wrote in Ephesians 4 verse 29, "Let no corrupt communication proceed out of your mouth, but such as is good for edifying as the need may be, that it may give grace to them that hear." The word corrupt here, it denotes that which provides no good service. You know, there's a majority of what people talk about nowadays that provides no good service. I've heard people on cell phones carry on long, lengthy conversations, and most of what they're saying didn't provide anything for me. They just bring anything to me. People will say things to us today, talk about things that just don't make any sense. Well, our words in the presence of others ought to be those that will build men up, rather than debasing them and getting down to their level. Again, Paul wrote in Colossians 3 and verse 8, "But now do ye also put them all away, anger, wrath, malice, railing, shameful speaking out of your mouth." The term signifies that which is base, characterized by shame. You know, as a result of the studies, it has been said that this word generally denotes the idea of foul or filthy language. You know, to a Christian, we've lost definitions. Because there are things that I've heard people even say in Bible classes that was a filthy thing that they said. Some men on some of these websites that we go to, these things, these lists that we're on, every once in a while someone will pop in there and say something that he has to be jumped on and say, you know, don't say that. Because we have forgotten what is foul. Those types of things. In connection with Colossians 3 and verse 8, Barclay once said, "There can never have been a time in history when so much filthy language is used as it is today. And the tragedy is that today there are many people who have become so habituated to unclean talk that they are unaware that they are even using it." That was written in 1957. That's over 40 years ago. If I do my math right. That's 50 years ago, sorry. Didn't do my math right. Over 50 years ago he wrote that. What do you think he'd say about today? If he had to say that about in the 50s. Profanity is such an invasive influence. It has been called, I read this and I thought, yeah, I'll put this in there. It's called a mind maggot. A mind maggot. It gnaws its way into the recesses of one's thinking, and if harbored, will make its presence spontaneously felt at the slightest provocation. I had a person stand right in front of me right after worship services, and we were walking out together, and that person said the S word right there in front of me. Because one of their kids came up there and poked them. And she said, "You little S." And then it clicked in her brain where she was at. And she turned to me and said, "I'm sorry." And I told her, "You need to repent to God, not me. And to your children, because you talk to them like that." You know, We maybe soon hear this idea of cussing mentality. Even some among those who don't verbalize it outright. You know, do you speak to yourself sometimes without saying it out loud? Are there thoughts that come into your mind that you don't put out there? You know, if you hang around people who curse and use that type of language, it's going to be working in your mind also. Those unclean thoughts. Well, some will say, well, we can't cut ourselves off from society. So, you know, what do you want us to do? I agree. But you can minimize your exposure. And you can speak up at work when people are saying things around you and say, I don't want to hear that. And if you have to, you can go through the grievance process. I'm going to tell you something, that's not an easy thing and it's not a fun thing to do. Because everybody at work is going to begin dealing with you as a pariah. But you can make a difference. Words convey ideas. They are vehicles of communication. It is therefore the idea associated with an expression that can create an evil word pattern. Ephesians 5 and verse 4 talks about the idea of filthy communication. Behavior that flouts social and moral standards, shamelessness, obscurity, obscenity. While shameful speech in Colossians 3 and verse 8 speaks about the kind of speech that is generally considered in poor taste. Obscene speech, dirty talk. Lasciviousness speech in 2 Peter 2 and verse 18 talks about the idea of illicit sexual images and idea, those kinds of talk that does that. Corrupt, morally unwholesome, harmful communication. Ephesians 4 and verse 29, the foolish talking. And that foolish there means literally moronic. Anybody know any morons? Listen to what they say. Jesus said, by your fruits you will know them. I can point out morons because of how they're talking, what they're saying, the kind of words they use. Words become profane when sacred meanings are treated in a common and trivial fashion. One of the commands of the Old Testament, from the Ten Commandments, Exodus 20 and verse 7, you shall not take the Lord your God in vain. The name of your Lord in vain. But also in Leviticus 19 and verse 12, to lie under oath is the attitude that accentuates our affirmation. And what we are in essence saying by taking an oath is, I'm saying in the presence of God, I say this is true. Brother, I'm going to tell you something, lying is normal nowadays. That's just the way it is. People lie so much in court, they'll raise their hand on that Bible and take no thought to what they're saying. What about the marriage vow? What are you doing then? Most preachers, even denominational people, whether they're men or women that do the service, what do they say in front of the people? Before God and these witnesses, and it may be their sixth marriage. They've broken that vow 5 times already. Who of us thinks they're going to hold it this time? You see, they're making a vow. Under the law of Moses, the name of God was not to be profaned. The principle involving taking the sacred name of the Lord and vulgarly transporting it into the domain of the secular. Many today will say, oh my God, Lord have mercy, Lord have mercy, Jesus, H, Christ. I've heard a lot of things. Those words. I don't even like to speak them, to use them for an example. They're just bad words. The word used profane in Matthew 12, verse 5, as well as in chapter 20, Acts 24, verse 6, is to cause something highly revered to become identified with the commonplace, violate sanctity, to desecrate, to profane. The idea of saying, good gosh, good gravy, golly, Well, okay, some of us know where that came from. The biblical parlance to curse brings forth the idea the term is legitimately used by God many times. In Galatians 3, verse 10, and also verse 13, Hebrews 6 and verse 8. But when employed whimsically by humans, it denotes the idea of curse is uttered against another as an expression of personal wrath. You see, getting into the idea of attitude. You know, some words we can use that in other contexts would be sinful. Think about it. We use the word hell and damn because the Bible speaks those words. But what if you said to someone, go to hell, or damn you? You see, now you've turned something that came to us through Scripture and turned it into something sinful. We need to be careful about these types of words. Very quickly, I want to look at three things very quickly. And it won't take, I promise you, it's just a phrase and we're done. How do we control our tongues? First of all, you need to purify your mind. And in Romans chapter 12, verse 2, it tells us we are not to be molded by the world, be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind. Folks, we've got to think about things differently. We have to. This is a salvation issue. Now, a lot of times we look at, divorce, remarriage, and think, oh boy, that's the big one. We got to be careful we don't do that. Well, folks, even the words we use is a salvation issue. How we speak, the things that we say. Secondly, pray to God for a change of mind. You see this more among new Christians who are coming out of the world. They struggle with language because before then they say anything. And they struggle with it. And we have to be patient, long-suffering. But language is easily picked up. We pick it up all the time, things we say. Sometimes we say things and don't even know what they mean. We need to pray to God to repent. And then thirdly, create proper habits. There are some things that my daughter has said that I've stopped her from saying them, and not that what she's saying in of itself is wrong. But I've told her, don't get in the habit of saying that. And the reason is because depending on who she said it to, might upset someone or might offend them. And I told her, let's not say that. Let's not get in the habit of saying that word. I want to close with this admonition, reminder, whatever you want to say, however you want to phrase it. When we elected Obama as a nation, as our president, I began receiving in my email thousands of jokes. Brethren, this is another form of communication. And when you forward that junk on to someone else, you're putting your seal of approval upon what's being sent. Think about that. We need to be very careful. Now, don't get me wrong. There is enough for us to condemn about Obama. But folks, if it has something to do with his race, things like that, we need to be very careful. Just like in dealing with illegal immigration, dealing with Muslims, we need to be very careful in what we say about people and the words we use and who we associate ourselves with, because it can come across as a racist, bigoted, terrible situation. Now, I know the liberals on the other side, you say anything negative, well, you're a racist. I understand that. But I'm talking about, I've seen some things, I've heard jokes brethren have said that to me, I would never have said. That was a racist joke, and people thought it was funny. Brother, we need to stand up against that, because that is another part of our speech that needs to be handled and taken into account when we deal with one another and talk about other people. Thank you for your time.